Everyone. Welcome to Sunday Morning Devotion. On behalf of our Christian Education Department, we bring greetings to you from Greater Bible Way Temple of the Apostolic Faith, where our pastor is none other than Bishop Timothy O. Johnson and our First Lady is Sister Sandra Johnson. And we would also like to give a big happy Father's Day to all you fathers and papas out there in TV land and viewing audience. So today I will be your speaker, and I will be briefly just want to go over a quick lesson. Today's subject will be titled Asaph's Lament. Our subject today will be Asaph's Lament. And our lesson text will be read from or comprised of Psalm 73, verses 1 through 3, verses 12 through 13, verses 16 through 18, and verses 21 through 26. Our related scriptures will be coming from Job 21, verses 1 through 34, and Psalms 16, verses 1 through 11, Psalms 16, 1 through 11, 1 through 10, 84, and 1 through 12. All right, so today we will be looking at first the lesson of Psalm, but we would like to first kind of explain where we at in this lesson as it pertains to the book of Psalms. If you look closely, you see on the slide that Psalms is comprised of basically divided in 6 divisions. 6 divisions of Psalms, 5 divisions, excuse me. And as you see, our 5 divisions, the first division is chapters 1 through 41. The second division is chapter 42 through 72. And the third division is 73 through 89. And the fourth division is 90 through 106. And the fifth division is 107 through 150. As you can see, this is 5 divisions of Psalms written, not broken up in books, but they're broken up in divisions. And we can concur that Asaph has wrote 12 of these divisions. Asaph was responsible for writing 12 of these. I think David was 73, so he wrote more of these divisions. And there was others, Haman and others, and Solomon, but we don't have prospective evidence of which ones were written by those, but based upon the scriptures, we know that they had some hands in writing the book of Psalms. But before we get into that, let's kind of do a little research on Asaph. Let's look at Asaph's resume. Asaph means in Hebrew gather. Now, Asaph was a descendant of Gershon, son of Berechiah, who is identified as a member of the Levites. Asaph is also the grandson of the prophet priest Samuel. He is also chief of the Levites, appointed to minister before the ark of the Lord. He was commissioned by King David to be the overseer of the choir that were responsible for rendering worship songs and music to God. Also, he is credited for performing at the dedication of Solomon's temple in 2 Chronicles chapter 5, verses 12. And so, being a commissioned by David, overseer of a choir, is very critical that you look at during that time. His worship was through song and music to God, not so much as about God, it was to God. His style of music and influence transcended to his descendants years later, after his death. At this time, Israel was very victorious. Through their worship, God allowed King David to subdue all of their enemies. Everyone from the Philistines on down, David was able to subdue all of their enemies. Their worship was to God, not so much about God, because they wanted to continually receive God's presence. So their worship was directly to God to receive his presence. They yearned in their worship for God's glory to continually to shine in Israel. He was proud. He was proud of his heritage. He was proud of what God has done in his life and others' life. He was proud of the King David. He was proud of the promises God had made through King David, and in the time that he was there, the house was beautiful. The temple was being rendered. Solomon came on the scene. Everyone worked together in bringing the temple, the worship in the temple. He was proud of what was going on and what was transpiring in his nation. Asaph was also hand in that as the praise and worship. Now, it doesn't mention that he's out of the tribe of Judah, who was out of the tribe of praise. He was a Levite, but he was over the orchestra or the choir that led the praises into all of these monumental things that happened in Israel. So he was proud because at this time they were prosperous. The enemies had been subdued. King David had made sure everything was in place for the erecting of Solomon's temple. And what would be a greater time to be a part of this great nation? But as we go to the next slide, we'll see on the next slide, Israel had a falling and an exile. Israel had a falling and they were in exile. After David's death, they did not continue in the ways and the glory that David had implemented in his reign as king. King Solomon desecrated the very essence of the worship of God while he was king. He allowed idolatrous worship to settle and integrate in the house. This influence among the people caused God to allow them to be in bondage once again. After he had delivered them from all, God had subdued David. God, through David, had subdued all the enemies. Now they find themselves back into bondage once again because of King Saul's idolatrous worship and King Solomon's idolatrous worship. King Solomon's lust for beauty and women built a temple to allow his wives and concubines to have pagan worship. In return, he was joining them in worship. It was almost like he was living a double life. God was not pleased in his anger, and God allowed them to be exiled and the temple being ruined because of their following of idolatrous worship. Now, I want to drop a little note in there. In the halls of faith in the book of Hebrews, this might be why King Solomon is not even mentioned in the halls of faith, because of what he did. Now, Samson had the same lust for women. But Samson, at the end of his death, he prayed a prayer and gave his life for the destruction of the Philistines, and the destruction of the Philistines, and for the safety of his people. But he did not fall into idolatrous worship. Idolatrous worship is a bad place to be in, especially as a child of God. So, I want to throw that in there. Now, as you see in Israel's fall on the slide in exile, Jerusalem falls to Babylon in 586 BC, 2 years after the Babylonian siege began. The leaders and the people of Jerusalem did not obey God's command through Jeremiah to surrender to Babylon. And it is often the case in the ancient world, the penalty requiring an invading army to lay siege in your city was total destruction. The account of destruction is found in chapter 39 of Jeremiah, and then in the identical account at the end of Jeremiah in 52. As the Babylonian army demolished the walls of the city, Solomon's temple, they once again, first exile was in 596, first exile into wealthy, the Judites or Israel. The wealthy and important ones have found themselves in exile under the Babylonian Empire. It was first the Assyrians, and the Babylonians took over the Assyrians, and then Babylon was the ruling nation at this time. It was so bad, the destruction of Israel at this time. Houses were burned. Tragic and how people witnessed King Zedekiah at the time. He was prophesied by Jeremiah. Jeremiah told him that if you surrender, your life will be spared. He tried to run, and the Babylonian captured him, subdued him, killed his sons in front of him, blinded him, and put him in chains until his death. The women and children were slaughtered. It was a massacre. The house was burned to a crisp. The glory and the beauty once was God. The beauty of God's glory is now a breeding ground for debauchery and sin. Asaph, during this time, he witnessed, you got to remember, he witnessed all of God's glory and beauty through the reign of David. He was there at the temple worship. He was there at the erecting of Solomon's temple. He was there when the songs was being sang about Saul slaying 1,000, but David slaying tens of thousands. He was there. He witnessed all of this to come to see the once was the beauty and glory of God, who he led the choir in the praise and worship, is now come to this. That's what he's witnessing in his eyes. So that's why it's saying Asaph's lament, or his torment, and so to speak, in witnessing all of this as being a leader in the ministerial group for a praise and worship with the choir that sung praises and worship unto God. Now, he's seeing this now has become a breeding ground for debauchery and sin. And how he viewed, in this lesson, it talks about how he viewed the people that were the Babylonians, how they were seemingly be prospering, seeming to be moving forward in life, seeming to be having a good time, no worries. Now, he was tormented by this. Now, as you can see, we have on the slide, the next slide, just a little timeline of the captivity of Babylon, the kingdom of Judah, the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, the 70-week prophetic message of Daniel, the dream of Daniel's, and the rebuilding of the temple. Just want you to see that as a timeline of what went on. And Asaph witnessed all of this. Can you imagine his torment? It said it was, it talks almost like he was sense of jealousy, like his foot slipped and he was beholding what the wicked was prospering. And it wasn't a sense of jealousy, it was a torment. For him to be looking at the same grounds of where he worshiped and his people worship, to see these people walking and prospering, and now God is not doing anything. Seemingly in his mind, God is not doing anything. But there's one thing that Asaph was able to hold on to, and that was hope. The Bible says that he found refuge, or he found in God's sanctuary, where he entered into God's sanctuary. Now, I don't know, or looking at the scriptures, if the sanctuary was destroyed at this time or after he wrote this psalm. But we do know what sanctuary means. Sanctuary means safety and refuge. That's what sanctuary means. So on that wise, we can go far as say is, he's looking at how was this destroyed? And in the sanctuary, he found safety. What did he found safety in? Hope. Hope. He was able to have hope. What was his hope based upon? It wasn't based upon wishful thinking. It wasn't based upon faith in something he has not witnessed and seen before. It was based upon the promises of God for David and his kingdoms. It was hope based upon what he had witnessed before the destruction came to Israel. It was hope based upon the faithfulness of God. He knew that he could rest on the fact that God was faithful. Witnesses of God's presence in their former battles and in the future promises of God. This is what hope built on. He remembered the testimony of Moses. His understanding became clearer. His anger became fuel for his zeal for the Lord, and his frustration became determination. So Asaph was able to find safety in the sanctuary, even though it was desecrated, even though it had diminished and demolished, even though he was in a place where he was in a strange foreign land where their own people worshiping other gods along with his people worshiping other gods, he still was able to find refuge. Now, what I would like to do here real quick is kind of join that to, or make some relevancy of where we are or how it relates to us today. Because a lot of us, especially Christians, we can find ourselves in the same position. So we'll go to the next slide. Let's look at Recent times. Let's go to the next slide. As we look at the pandemic, starting as COVID-19, but it really hit us. It brewed in 2019. But in 2020, you can see what happened. As you can see right here, this stats from the Statista, and I'll even look at the stats from Johns Hopkins Hospital, confirmed at the end of October 31, 2021, the world reached 5 million deaths of COVID-19. 5 million deaths. You see it here in the timeline, mysterious new illnesses, the world shuts down, uptick in mental health issues, the virus spreads, causes cases multiply, flattening the curve for a while, new hope, new mutations. Over and over again, we're seeing this virus develop different strands. The world shuts down. The seals, the borders, the sports teams, the council sessions, the school closes, the employees go home. People start wearing masks, social distancing. The churches shut down. You're not able to worship. Where were you able to worship is not there no more. Some churches didn't survive, even to this day. They didn't make it through the pandemic, and we're still in a pandemic. We still haven't fully recovered from that. That was just 2 years ago. This is one of the effects of the pandemic from 2020 to 2021. Those of you that worship in your local churches or grew up in churches, those churches are not there anymore. At that time, the doors was closed. No more praises, no more singing of the choir. Even here in our church, and today, to make it personal, we was not able to experience that. The choir not singing anymore, people gathering. That was bothersome time. And you can look around, you can see the whole world seems as though they're having fun at their gatherings, at their places, the things that they do in the world. I know they showed a picture of in Chicago when they had the, I think it was the food fest that they have. I can't think of the name of it right now. And they showed a panoramic view from the sky. It's like 1 million people gathered, people going to their concerts. But we are not able, that the children of God are not able to come together. That could be frustrating and tormenting to us. Now, on the next slide, you can see as we enter in 2022, and I'm almost done, 2022, now we hit with mass shootings all across the U.S. According to Gun Violence Archive, since 2022, there have been at least 230 mass shootings in which 4 or more people were shot or killed, not including the attacker, in a single incident. We have left 256 dead and almost 1,000 injured. And this statistic, this ends in, since we started 2022, so this is more up to date, but almost 230 mass shootings. We ain't got to go through the list. We see it all the time. And I think this ends at May 30th. So we don't know what has been happening in the past month. This is just May. But 230 mass shootings, not 230 shootings. We left almost 250 dead. And if you look to the other side, you can see there, you see Putin and the president of Ukraine. Now we have this war going on. Infiltration of prices skyrocketing, food shortages. It's just a whole band of terror. We get out of one pandemic only to find ourselves in another situation. And this is not affecting just our church, my church, here at Greater Byway. This is affecting the world globally. And this is what we are starting in 2022. Now, even with that being brewed, we can look at one more thing, that in 2022 and the next side, now, for those of you who don't know, we're dealing with the issue, in the next slide, we're dealing with the issue of monkeypox. Monkeypox just coming out of nowhere. We're seeing now this is caused by a virus that is closely related to smallpox that was first discovered in 1958. It causes pustules all over the body, or boils, highly contagious. Symptoms can appear up to 21 days after one is infected. It can be contracted through animals. Over 1,000 cases has been reported worldwide. Now, we've come from the pandemic of dealing with COVID only to deal with another issue after all of this stuff is going on. And at this time, what do we have to rely on? Just like Asaph, we have to rely on being in God's sanctuary, his refuge. So if your church doors are open today, you should thank God, because that is the safest place to be. here at Greater Byway Temple of the Apostolic Faith, located on 3410 Old Selma Road in Montgomery, Alabama. We are in the safest place because we can find refuge. Where's our refuge and our hope is built on? The testimonies of the saints before us that had passed. Death reigned in the world during that time. Over 5 million deaths during the COVID pandemic, but we are still here being able to celebrate our God and what God has done for us. What hope is our hope built upon? The faithfulness of God. God was faithful then, he is faithful now. So our doors are open. We don't have everything at 100%, but we can, just like Asaph, we have something to grab on, and that's the hope and the glory of God. And in safety, we can find safety in his sanctuary. God bless you today. Hope something was said to encourage your hearts. Once again, happy Father's Day. And this concludes our Sunday morning devotion.